The story of Ted Bundy begins not with a monster lurking in shadows, but with a young man who could have passed as anyone's classmate, co-worker, or neighbor. Born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont, his very identity began under a veil of secrecy. His mother, Eleanor Louise, was unmarried and barely in her 20s when she gave birth. To avoid the shame of illegitimacy in that era, the family wove a lie: Ted would grow up believing his grandparents were his parents, and that his young mother was his sister. From the very start, his world was built on deception. Those who knew him as a child recalled a boy who seemed polite, intelligent, even sensitive at times. But there were cracks that showed through. Neighbors noticed his unease around others, the way he hovered at the edge of play rather than joining in. As he grew older, Ted developed unsettling habits. A fascination with knives, an unusual curiosity about death, and a compulsion to watch people when they weren't aware. He was quiet about these impulses, but they simmered beneath the surface, waiting for an outlet. In school, Bundy worked tirelessly to appear normal. He dressed neatly, smiled often, and carried himself with an air of confidence. But intimacy didn't come naturally to him. Relationships felt hollow, conversations rehearsed. It was as though he were studying the behaviors of others, mimicking emotions rather than feeling them. This detachment would become one of his defining traits, a predator's ability to wear a mask of humanity. By the time Bundy entered college, he had learned how effective that mask could be. Women found him attractive and attentive, while men often described him as intelligent and ambitious. He majored in psychology at the University of Washington, a choice that seemed fitting for someone so interested in the human mind. But even as he studied the workings of empathy, his private fantasies grew darker. Bundy immersed himself in politics, volunteering for campaigns and appearing at rallies with the same polished charm he used everywhere else. He even worked at a suicide hotline, answering desperate late-night calls with calm reassurance. Co-workers remembered him as caring and trustworthy, a man with an uncanny ability to make people feel safe. One of those co-workers, and Rule, would later become a famous crime writer. At the time, she said she could never have imagined that her kind colleague would one day be unmasked as a killer. But even then, Bundy's double life had begun. When the phone calls ended and the campaign meetings adjourned, his urges returned. He prowled the streets at night, peered through windows, and fantasized about control. The polite young man who smiled at strangers by day was already plotting by night. The transformation was underway, and soon the world would discover the truth about the charming face of Ted Bundy. By the early 1970s, Ted Bundy seemed to embody success. He was bright, ambitious, and carried himself with the poise of someone destined for a career in politics or law. To those around him, he was charming, attentive, and, at least on the surface, kind. But beneath that polished mask, the fantasies that had haunted him since adolescence had begun to grow into something far more dangerous. Bundy's first serious relationship was with a woman often referred to as Stephanie Brooks, a pseudonym used to protect her identity. She was elegant, wealthy, and represented everything Ted wanted: social standing, sophistication, and the kind of life he believed he deserved. Bundy fell deeply for her, and for a time, it appeared that he had found direction. He studied harder, presented himself as refined, and mirrored her ambitions. But when she ended the relationship, citing his lack of maturity and ambition, something inside Bundy shattered. To him, it wasn't just rejection, it was humiliation. That wound, coupled with his growing compulsions, would fuel his transformation into something monstrous. Though he eventually rekindled the relationship briefly years later, it wasn't out of love. It was to prove to himself that he could win her back and then discard her as she had discarded him. That calculated act revealed Bundy's obsession with control, domination, and power over others. The rejection had become a seed of rage, one that would manifest in violence. At the same time, Bundy's darker urges escalated. He began stalking women, watching them from a distance, imagining scenarios of abduction and control. He often targeted women who resembled Stephanie: slender, long-haired, parted down the middle. This fixation would become a chilling hallmark of his crimes. By 1974, Bundy's facade of normality could no longer contain his compulsions. That January, he broke into the basement bedroom of 18-year-old Karen Sparks, a university student in Seattle. She survived the brutal attack but was left with permanent injuries and memory loss. For Bundy, this was the crossing of a threshold, the moment when fantasy became reality. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. The attacks escalated with terrifying speed. Only weeks later, another young woman, Linda Ann Healy, disappeared from her room. Her neatly made bed, carefully arranged belongings, and missing nightgown painted a chilling picture of a predator who left nothing to chance. Bundy had refined his method. He could blend into ordinary life by day, and at night, vanish into darkness to hunt. As the months passed, more young women vanished. Always attractive, always resembling his former lover, and always gone without a trace. Friends and families were left with unanswered questions, police baffled by the absence of evidence. Ted Bundy's mask remained firmly in place, and no one suspected the polite law student and political volunteer was, in fact, becoming one of the most prolific killers of his era. The descent had begun. By the summer of 1974, the Pacific Northwest was gripped by fear. Young women were vanishing at an alarming rate, their disappearances linked by a chilling pattern. All were attractive, college-aged, with long dark hair parted in the middle. Families begged for answers, police scoured campuses, but the predator remained invisible. What no one realized was that Ted Bundy had perfected a hunting method that exploited both his charm and his appearance of harmlessness. Bundy often approached women in public places, libraries, campuses, shopping centers, carrying props like a fake cast or crutches. In a calm, polite voice, he would ask for help loading books into his car or lifting a package. His victims, seeing a handsome young man who appeared injured, felt sympathy and agreed. Once near his Volkswagen Beetle, they were overpowered, bound, and driven away into the night. Bundy's mask of civility was his deadliest weapon. On July 14, 1974, Bundy's boldness reached terrifying heights. At Lake Sammamish State Park in Washington, with hundreds of people enjoying a summer afternoon, Bundy approached several women. Introducing himself simply as Ted, he asked for help with his sailboat. Witnesses later described a well-dressed, handsome man with his arm in a sling. That day, two women, Janice Ott and Denise Naslund, vanished without a trace. Their disappearances, in broad daylight and within hours of each other, sent shockwaves through the region. For the first time, witnesses had a description and a name, Ted. Despite the breakthrough, investigators faced a challenge. Thousands of tips flooded in, and among the names submitted was Ted Bundy. But he was quickly dismissed. After all, he was a law student, politically connected, intelligent, and seemingly incapable of such brutality. His very normality protected him. As months turned into years, Bundy's violence spread across states. In Utah, young women disappeared under eerily similar circumstances. Bundy had moved for law school, carrying his crimes with him. Carol Duranch, one of his would-be victims, managed a miraculous escape. After he lured her into his car pretending to be a police officer, she fought her way free, leaving behind critical evidence that would later connect him to a larger web of crimes. But Bundy was a master of deception. When questioned by police, he smiled, cooperated, and presented himself as innocent. His charm disarmed even seasoned investigators. Time and again, he slipped through their grasp, leaving only grieving families and cold trails behind. By 1975, Bundy's violence escalated further. He no longer waited for opportunity, he created it. His killings grew more brutal, his confidence unshakable. In Colorado, more women disappeared, their remains later discovered scattered across remote landscapes. Each crime deepened the mystery, yet Bundy's public life continued untouched. He dated women, attended school, and mingled with friends, all while leading a second life of unimaginable horror. Behind his smile, the mask was cracking. Authorities were closing in, but Ted Bundy was not finished. His story was about to enter its most chilling chapter. By the mid-1970s, Ted Bundy's carefully constructed double life was beginning to fracture. Though he still charmed friends and maintained relationships, investigators were finally drawing connections between the disappearances spreading across Washington, Utah, and Colorado. In 1975, a routine traffic stop changed everything. A police officer pulled Bundy over and discovered burglary tools in his car: crowbars, handcuffs, a ski mask, and rope. Though not enough for a murder charge, it was the first real crack in his mask of normalcy. Investigators dug deeper, linking Bundy to multiple cases. Survivors like Carol Duranch bravely identified him in lineups, describing the man who had nearly ended their lives. For the first time, Bundy's charm could not shield him. He was arrested and charged with attempted kidnapping in Utah. Yet even behind bars, Bundy remained confident, smiling at reporters, projecting innocence. To the public, it was difficult to reconcile the polite, well-spoken law student with the monster described by prosecutors. But Bundy was not finished. In 1977, while awaiting trial in Colorado, he executed the first of 2 daring escapes. During a court hearing, he managed to leap from a second-story library window and vanish into the mountains. For 6 days he evaded capture, surviving on the run before being recaptured. The audacity stunned the nation, but Bundy's determination only grew. Months later, he escaped again, this time through a hole he had meticulously sawed into his jail ceiling. Shedding weight, studying guard routines, and exploiting weaknesses, Bundy walked free. For weeks, the country was on edge. Bundy was no longer a suspect or a curious figure in the news, he was a fugitive killer with nothing to lose. His escape led him to Florida, where his crimes would reach their most violent peak. In January 1978, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. What unfolded was a scene of pure horror. He bludgeoned and strangled multiple women in their sleep, killing 2 and leaving others gravely injured. The brutality of the attack shocked even seasoned investigators. Unlike his earlier, calculated abductions, this was raw, frenzied violence. It was as though Bundy, pushed to desperation, had fully unleashed the monster within. Just weeks later, Bundy abducted and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, his youngest and final known victim. By now, the facade of charm was gone. Bundy was spiraling, reckless, and unable to suppress the violence any longer. His reign of terror ended in February 1978, when he was stopped in a stolen car by Pensacola police. Exhausted and disheveled, Bundy finally admitted defeat with a chilling line, "I wish you had killed me." The man who had once appeared unstoppable was now in custody for the last time. But Bundy's story did not end with his capture. Ahead lay the trial of the century, one that would cement his legacy as both a killer and a manipulator of public attention. Ted Bundy's trial in Florida became one of the most sensational and widely covered cases in American history. The courtroom was packed with journalists, curious citizens, and the families of his victims. From the very beginning, Bundy treated the trial as a stage, appearing polished, confident, and composed. His charm, which had once helped him lure victims, now captivated the courtroom. He acted as his own attorney, cross-examining witnesses with poise and intelligence, a display that left jurors and observers both impressed and unsettled. But behind the polished courtroom veneer was the reality of his crimes. Forensic evidence, eyewitness testimony, and survivor accounts painted a chilling portrait. Bloodstains, fingerprints, and hair fibers linked Bundy to multiple murders, and the brutality of his attacks was revealed in painstaking detail. The stories of the young women he had abducted, murdered, and discarded shook the nation. Families recounted lost daughters, sisters, and friends whose lives had been extinguished by a man who had appeared so ordinary. Bundy's courtroom theatrics could not erase the mounting evidence. He remained composed, occasionally charming, but the tension was palpable. His choice to represent himself was part bravado, part strategy. He sought to control the narrative, but the overwhelming proof exposed the horrifying truth. Jurors watched as the charming law student transformed in their eyes into a calculating predator capable of premeditated, heinous acts. Outside the courtroom, media coverage sensationalized Bundy's persona. He was the handsome, polite killer, a terrifying contradiction that fascinated the public. True crime writers, journalists, and psychologists debated how a man so outwardly normal could commit such atrocities. Bundy's name became synonymous with deception, charisma, and unspeakable violence, a chilling case study in the psychology of evil. During the trial, Bundy's demeanor occasionally slipped, revealing glimpses of the darkness that had driven his actions. Witnesses described the emotionless calm he exhibited when confronted with evidence of his killings. He displayed no remorse, no empathy for the victims whose lives he had destroyed. In his mind, the mask of charm had become a tool of control, both in life and in court. The trial concluded with a guilty verdict, sending Bundy to death row. Yet even in confinement, he continued to manipulate, charm, and attempt to control the narrative. Journalists interviewed him, psychologists studied him, and he remained a figure of morbid fascination. His story forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, deception, and the thin line between outward normality and hidden monstrosity. As Bundy awaited execution, the nation wrestled with one question: how could a man so outwardly ordinary commit crimes so horrifying? The answer lay in a life defined by obsession, control, and the duality of appearance versus reality, a duality that would haunt true crime forever. As Ted Bundy sat on Florida's death row, the weight of his crimes finally caught up to him. The man who had charmed friends, co-workers, and strangers alike was no longer hiding behind his facade. In the years leading to his execution, Bundy's case became a window into the darkest corners of human psychology. Psychologists, criminologists, and journalists pored over every detail, trying to understand how a seemingly ordinary man could commit acts so monstrous. Bundy himself offered interviews in which he discussed his crimes with a chilling calm, at times confessing details he had once concealed. He spoke about control, obsession, and compulsion, giving society an unnerving glimpse into the mind of a serial killer. Yet even in confession, he maintained the poise and charm that had allowed him to deceive for so long. The duality was striking: a man capable of human empathy one moment, and unthinkable cruelty the next. His execution was carried out on January 24, 1989, in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Witnesses described a calm, almost composed Bundy, leaving the world with the same controlled demeanor he had carried through his life. For the victims' families, justice had arrived, but the scars of his actions remained, a permanent reminder of the lives stolen and the innocence shattered. The legacy of Ted Bundy endures as both a cautionary tale and a subject of fascination. His crimes forced law enforcement to improve profiling techniques, influenced legislation on handling violent offenders, and reshaped public awareness of personal safety. Beyond statistics and headlines, however, Bundy's story remains a chilling study in human deception, the power of charm, and the darkness that can hide behind a friendly face. For viewers, the lesson is clear: evil does not always announce itself. It can reside behind the smile of a neighbor, the confident gaze of a coworker, or the polite voice of someone you trust. Bundy's life serves as a haunting reminder that appearances can deceive, and that monsters can wear the most ordinary of faces. Ted Bundy's mask is gone, but his story continues to captivate, horrify, and educate. Through understanding his actions, society gains insight into the mind of a killer and the importance of vigilance, awareness, and justice. For more chilling real-life true crime stories and in-depth documentaries, subscribe to our channel and never miss a story that reveals the hidden darkness of humanity.